This is Keys to the Shop, episode 85, and today we're talking about how we ruin the specialty experience. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DiFirio. I'm your host for the show, and thanks for joining me on the show today. It's going to be a good one. Kind of a inflammatory title, but we're talking about how we can ruin the specialty experience, and I think it's going to be a pretty useful episode. Now, before we do, I do want to thank our sponsors here at Keys to the Shop, starting with Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee is a specialty coffee equipment supplier based out of Louisville, Kentucky. And from the beginning of their company, they have set out to make the best coffee brewing equipment available to the general public. And their focus is on curating the best equipment for every need, from grinders to espresso machines to under-counter refrigeration, commercial, home use. They've got what you need. You just go to prima-coffee.com, see what they have to offer you. It's a ton of stuff, and also a lot of resources. They put a lot of effort into helping their customers understand the equipment, know how to use it optimally. They just put a big emphasis on having the expertise to help their customers get the right gear to fit every situation. I've known them for a while, and I just love their work. I love the people that work there. They always do a great job, and I know you're going to love them too. So again, that's prima-coffee.com for all of your equipment needs, and thank you to Prima for supporting Keys to the Shop. I also want to thank our sponsor, Pacific Foods, the ones behind the Pacific Barista Series line of non-dairy performance beverages. And by the way, a big congratulations to Pacific Barista Series for their win of Best New Product at the SCA Expo in Seattle this past week with their new oat milk, which I can't wait to try. I think it'll be really fantastic. So congrats, Pacific. These products are designed specifically for the professional barista and the standards for excellence they demand. So whether it's almond, soy, coconut, rice, or now oat milk, its ability to take the heat of steaming, produce an unmatched silky texture, and keep the flavor balance focused on coffee makes it a perfect choice for your cafe's menu. They are just a huge supporter of the specialty industry. They have been for a while. They just demonstrate that by listening to and serving the needs of real specialty coffee professionals. So go visit pacificfoods.com and see how the Barista Series line of non-dairy beverages can elevate your cafe's menu. Now, today we are talking about ways to ruin the specialty coffee experience, and you've all been part of it. You've seen it happen at the hands of other people, and you have been the one to kind of ruin it. I know I have. During my years, there's no way you can get very far as a barista without both making somebody's day and also kind of ruining their day for specialty coffee. Now, the trick is, I think, being able to minimize our negative impact more and more as we go. So here's the thing, the kind of philosophy behind this. We're going to give some practical examples, but the philosophy behind this is really, we promise a specialty experience, and oftentimes we fall short because we build with marketing, we build with packaging, we promise notes and more notes. We charge higher prices than people are used to paying for coffee, and justifiably so. And then when people experience it, there's an expectation that oftentimes is not met. So let me start by saying this. People have been hurt by coffee in the past. They walk into our stores with a history. Oftentimes, they've gone to a larger specialty retailer or even an independent and had a bad drink or a bad service experience. Whatever it is, people tend, human nature, I think, just dictates that you tend to carry around with you more in the front of the mind the negative experiences you have rather than the ones that are positive. And so, unfair as it may be, we need to work really hard to make a great impression and also kind of embrace the fact that our industry is represented by this whole spectrum of different producers of specialty coffee at the retail level, and not all doing it well. And therefore, as different levels of skill and care speak for specialty coffee, it's kind of a grab bag of results. And we can't take it personally that people have built up an expectation of being disappointed. But what we can do is sort of own that and try to make up for it with the experience that we do give people. Now, what I think is helpful in terms of how you might think of this situation, in the shop there are lots of pieces of minutia that need to be put in place and kept in place by staff and leadership. They contribute to either a really great experience, or they contribute to this lowered expectation. You can think of it as white noise, like an air conditioning unit that's always running. Like out back of one of the cafes I worked at in Sunnergoss Coffee, we had an air unit that would run and run and run. And if you're having a meeting out there, you learn to ignore it. It's just there. It's part of the experience. But then when it shuts off, people tend to pause, look around, and kind of comment on the fact that it just shut off and they just got used to it. This is sort of the way I view how a customer reacts to a well-curated and a well-cared-for coffee bar and coffee experience. When they walk in and they don't experience the kind of negative white noise that they're used to experiencing potentially from, like we talked about, maybe some bad experiences that they've had, to them it's the comment-worthy moment, whether internally or to you, that something is different about that place, even if it's not something they can articulate. That impact of absence, let's call it, is kind of what we're after. It's the same thing with coffee. So coffee is, if you've never had coffee before, coffee is bitter. And after a while, you learn to tune out the bitterness and pick up the signal over the noise. But it doesn't stop us from trying to minimize the bitterness and accentuate the sweetness. So what we're going to talk about today are some ways that we tend to accentuate the bitterness unnecessarily, and some ways that we can accentuate the sweetness of the experience of specialty, so that we're not unintentionally ruining a specialty experience, but we're actually delivering on over and above what people expect. So there are a few factors at play here, and we're going to take them one by one. The first thing is how we view problems in the bar. So we need to identify the roadblocks, the contributing factors to these negative experiences. One of the first things that you can do is get a customer's point of view on your establishment. This was actually a point made by James Hoffman in one of his latest vlogs on YouTube about the London Coffee Festival, and his comment was essentially that the organizers should take a moment to try to experience the show in the way that the people who attend experience it. And the idea is that if they do that, that might inspire change in the way that it's formatted. Maybe it could be longer or more accessible, whatever. But it's true that if you're in a position of leadership, if you're in a place where you can actually change something, then you need to be able to experience what it's like from the customer's point of view. James suggests that we order coffee from your website or order a coffee from your coffee bar and see how the experience is from the customer's point of view. So putting in place a mindset that is constantly looking at where you are in the organization and what you have within your scope of agency to change. What can you do? What actions can you take, whether it's your own actions or helping coach the actions of others, to be able to accentuate the sweetness of this experience at your shop. An idea could be that you just ask customers too. Not only do you experience it yourself, but then ask some of your trusted regulars what they might change about the experience in your bar. That's a very vulnerable thing to do. I don't really hear many people do that. I've never really heard of anybody asking that kind of a question, because no news is good news oftentimes when it comes to customer feedback. But the whole idea of something like this comes around to this common 360 review process that's really popular in corporate settings, where you get all of the people that you interact with to comment on, anonymously actually, to give you feedback that will help you become a better professional. But if you're not getting feedback from your baristas, if you're not getting feedback from your customers about the experience on a somewhat regular basis, then there's no way for you to know for sure whether or not you're kind of perpetuating this negative experience unbeknownst to you because you haven't really investigated it. So that's the kind of mindset we need to go into this with. We want to be able to cut problems off at the pass and not let them kind of metastasize under our noses until they become really big problems. So start getting in the habit of addressing on a regular basis these types of things in your cafe. So let's go over some ideas for ways that we tend to kind of contribute to the negative experience in a cafe of our service or our quality. One of the things that we generally tend to find is that when you become more familiar with your surroundings as a barista, you start kind of getting comfortable. And when you get comfortable, everything kind of starts turning into the inward culture behind the bar. And there's this slow slide into an us versus them mentality, where it's a matter of trying to defend your cafe culture, your staff culture rather, against the interruption of the customer coming up to the register. There's always this need to kind of counterbalance this pull to that side of the counter. So knowing that this is a real kind of pull to the other side of the bar, where we kind of build this wall of separation between us and the customer, I'm going to talk about some practical things that we need to be able to employ in order to make sure that we are not unintentionally ruining a specialty coffee experience for somebody, and that we're paying mind to the nuances that make up collectively this good experience for a customer, so they can feel the impact of the absence of these roadblocks to their enjoyment. One of the first things that we can do is make sure that we look like we're actually ready to serve somebody. That's an issue of how we carry ourselves behind the bar. We're not talking about, standing at attention and things like that, but there are definitely things that indicate to a customer that you are disinterested in this process. That means things like having your hands in your pockets, leaning up against a refrigerator, sort of sprawling yourself out on the counter, stretching, and all this other stuff. Carry ourselves in a way that just looks like, we don't want to be here. And that may be true. Maybe you don't want to be there. And it's kind of not the point of what I'm saying. The point of what I'm saying is that know that your messaging to the customer is that what they're about to purchase is not worth you paying attention to. So why should they pay attention to it? That's what the message sends. So kind of being careful that our posture is one that looks like we're actually paying attention to our work and we're paying attention to the cafe. When the open sign is on, are we open? Are we able to serve the needs of the space if we're not aware of them? And will people trust us with their experience if we look like we're just halfway between sleep and wakefulness? That's the first thing. Conversations are another one. So being able to keep our conversations lower in tone, and also being able to cut off our conversations immediately. This is just an understanding that you should have with your coworkers that, hey, if a customer comes in, we are going to greet them and I'm going to stop talking to you like immediately. What happens when this doesn't get talked about is that people carry on their conversations in front of the customer and they wait until their conversation winds down. And the customer's just thinking like, what? Where am I? Am I ordering at the wrong counter? You kind of create this situation where they're made to feel that they're interrupting you. And oftentimes you'll feel like they're interrupting you because you've allowed yourself to get so entangled in this conversation that you give off this vibe that, man, I really didn't want to have to serve you this coffee, or I didn't want to have to interrupt that conversation. So again, we need to kind of counterbalance ourselves against that inevitable pull So conversations behind the bar, make sure that first you're not forcing the entire cafe to have to listen to you talk to your coworkers. You also want to cut off those conversations before they becomes a situation where people feel out of place and that they're inconveniencing you for just coming into the coffee bar. A couple other things here. Eating behind the bar, it might not be a big deal to have something in a designated employee area, but discretion is the key here. Having to finish your mouthful of food while you're addressing a customer, it's just strange. Again, there's so many different policies that cafes have. Even if it's okay for you to eat a full meal in front of a customer, just know that it doesn't matter how confident you are and how within the rules you're playing. A customer doesn't necessarily view it more positively because it's allowed behind the bar. So just know that the impact of that is kind of a gross out factor. This is just my opinion, of course, and I'm sure this might be maybe a little contentious, but there's discrete ways of going about these things. In some cases, the health department would just have your butt for doing that. So just know the law, but also know the impact of that on the cafe and the messaging that you're putting out there. Phone use behind the bar. It's being on your phone. Like if you're allowed to be on your phone behind the bar, you can be discreet about it. But if you're sitting there texting, like, eyeballs to screen and, or just in an obvious way, again, it's this, you're not ready to serve. You're not in a place where you're going to be attentive to the needs of the customer, and they're going to feel like they're interrupting you. It just sends the wrong message. And we need to represent specialty coffee as best as we can. There's a lot at stake in the retail environment. And when we start allowing ourselves to kind of slide in the direction of sort of turning the coffee bar into our personal living room, then we're not going to be representing the supply chain, the hard work that went into that coffee as best we can. We're just giving ourselves these little outs. So dial it back, prune it back, make sure that you're aware of yourself behind the bar. Personally, I just don't like the idea of having cell phone use behind the bar. That's just my thought on it. But even if you're allowed to have your cell phone out or text behind the bar, maybe you have a system of communication that everybody has to use. There should be a discreet way of going about it that everyone's aware of. Managers, just make sure that you communicate the proper way to go about texting and receiving texts that are work appropriate in the workplace. These are little things, but they really do. They build up. So behind the bar, we just need to do what we can to be attentive, have a posture of service, be open for business ourselves when the business is open, and watch out that we are not just first serving the needs of our internal staff culture before we're serving the needs of the customers out there, and they're not feeling like they're inconveniencing us or interrupting something private going on behind the bar. Now, in terms of how we care for the cafe, one of the main things that we kind of lack in is the ability to make sure that the environment the guest is interacting with is actually cared for well. Part of this has to do with cafe blindness, where you just get used to the idea that there's clutter in that corner and it doesn't bother you. But for a customer, it might be a really big deal. And we've got other fish to fry. We've got a cafe to open, and people were waiting outside the door before the lights came on. So we're not really thinking about that. And by the end of the shift, we just want to go. And when you're a manager, you may be behind on your scheduling. There may be an order that went wrong. Somebody called in sick. There's a number of things that each person who occupies a role in the cafe can say, well, we saw that, but we didn't do anything about it. And when you've got dozens of people noticing things, but then sort of stuffing it in the back burner, we're talking about a lot of little points of potential customer annoyance that builds up that kind of negative white noise that we were talking about that generally is part of the cafe. This means stuff like wobbly tables, sticky tabletops, condiment bars that are perpetually out of cream or sugar, broken pieces of furniture, a spill that hasn't been cleaned up in hours, busing of tables that hasn't taken place because nobody's gone out into the cafe for a while. These are things where now the customer has to start kind of punching in as an employee and helping you bus tables, starting to fold up napkins and level your tables for you. They're not on the payroll. They're supposed to be enjoying themselves, and we're supposed to be serving them. But here they are now, really having to work to enjoy themselves, not to spill their latte. How many of you have had somebody ask for a damp rag to clean the tabletop? That's really embarrassing. It's embarrassing because we should have known. We should have known. Somebody should have been out there. A pile of dishes appears on the counter because they weren't bussed, and it was just from a customer who came in and wanted a table. That, again, is something that we should take note of and say, here's a problem that we need to solve before it becomes a bigger one. If it's staffing, okay, let's look at that. Or what is the SOP for cafe checks? When you go out into the cafe, how often do you do that? Take 2 minutes to scan the cafe with your eyes, go grab a bunch of dishes and run them back. Just takes a few minutes. There's little things that you can do when you follow through on the observations that are made. And if you build a culture in your cafe where observations of these things are taken seriously and actually written down, stored, and reviewed, it's more likely that you're going to take care of them and not let them sort of begin to work their way into just what's expected in the cafe. If your cafe environment is just good enough, you want your cafe to be a 90-point coffee and it's actually just an 80 or a 79-point coffee. So you're serving these great coffees, but you're serving it in an environment like your cafe is a vessel that's just dirty. Great coffee in a dirty cup. So kind of strange, and we do have the ability to do a better job on that. It's just kind of a bear to tackle, especially when it builds up. So you don't want to let it build up. Stay on top of it. That means things like the bathrooms too. I would encourage you to read the bathroom chapter of Colin Harmon's book, What I Know About Running Coffee Shops. This is something that I've been saying for a while also, which is when customers come to your coffee bar and you have a dirty bathroom, it basically ruins the whole experience. It really does. When you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, then you feel like what else is this contaminated in this cafe? Everything is great, but this bathroom is awful. It pretty much makes the whole thing awful. Staying on top of those areas that the guest interacts with, it brings us right back to the beginning of this talk we're having, which is we need to put ourselves in the customer's shoes. We need to be able to experience our cafes the way that they do, and then take action. So this brings us to the next thing. So leadership. Leadership in the cafe is another aspect where we tend to drop the ball. And it's not so much in the sense of inspiring baristas and things like that, although that is certainly a factor. What I want to communicate about this is management and leadership, maybe because they are strapped for time or energy, tend to under-communicate and under-equip staff to perform at an optimum level. You don't have the equipment you need to do the job well. You don't have the information to sell the thing that you're supposed to sell. This is something that lands purely in the lap of leadership. And communication is one of the main jobs that leadership has in the cafe, equipping and communicating for success. So when leadership drops the ball in that way, it trickles down into the guest experience in the coffee bar when they ask about a particular origin and they're met with blank stares. Now, there's some times where you do teach a barista something and they forget it. But I find that oftentimes this is more to do with sort of a misguided notion that everybody should be self-directed and find the information for themselves. No. Leadership and management, your job is to actually tell people things and follow up with them to make sure they absorb the information and learn it and teach them. Not just give them books and things to say, hey, go read this. It's more about coaching. It's more about being alongside them. And this is one of the things that really gives birth to a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about here. The underlying idea here of providing a specialty experience, serving specialty coffee, means we've got to know as leaders what we are planting. What are we planting? This is key for planting coffee. If you don't know what you're planting, you can't care for the land well. You can't really bring the tree to maturation properly. You won't know how to process it as well. Counterculture Coffee is just talking about advances that they're making in being able to test the DNA of trees so that farmers can know how best to care for plants that they've just assumed were one type when they were actually another. So as leaders, if you're planting seeds and you don't know what you're planting, then you will not know the fruit until it's too late. And you can't just close your eyes and cross your fingers. You've got to know, am I communicating well? Am I equipping well? What would it be like for the baristas to carry out the directive that I'm actually giving them to do? What are the tools that they need? I mean, this goes back to our SOPs episode. I would highly encourage you to listen to that episode where we talk about how to sort of write SOPs and establish these procedures in your cafe. But one of the main ways that we tend to ruin specialty coffee experiences is we tend to under-communicate as leaders and under-equip for success. So if you're a manager, if you're a head barista, a head trainer, if you're anywhere above a barista in your role, you have a responsibility to plant well, tend well, and see the harvest of that in the interactions that people have in the cafe. And a lot of the things that we talked about, they'll be cut off at the pass before they even start. Finally, I want to talk about quality. So specialty coffee quality is one of the main things we hang our hats on. The quality of our coffee is paramount, but it's the consistency of that quality that actually creates trust and it creates an experience that people can embrace. So first of all, with quality, one of the things that we tend to do is just we don't taste things enough. We don't dial in our batch brews enough. We don't dial in the espresso enough. There is a sense in which if it meets a particular set of numerical standards, that it's good enough. It's going to go out. It's going to go out. I'm going to go and get this drink done. The cup is it may be tasting a little bit bitter, but it's a caramel latte, so it doesn't really matter. There are lots of things that we give ourselves an out for when it comes to quality. And to the degree that we allow ourselves to serve drinks that are under standard is the degree to which we will slide into sort of a less than specialty representation of specialty coffee. So we've all done it. We all have done it. And every day is a test. Every drink that we make is a test. And sometimes we fail. Sometimes we succeed. But the less we fail, the more we hold ourselves accountable to put drinks out that we know are good, and don't put drinks out that you know are bad or less than great. That is paving the way for success in the industry. I really firmly believe that quality of coffee and the quality of a coffee service experience is, I think, a rudder that turns this ship of the specialty industry, creates demand. We want more of this coffee. We want more of this experience. And if people start saying that, then we increase demand. We can increase prices. We build. But if people start saying we want less of this, or this is not worth it, or I'm not going back there because, then we are undoing the work that others have been building up. It kind of makes me think about, what if? These are coffee shops. One is increasing customers' perception of specialty coffee. And then on the other side of the country, somebody is undoing that work. Are we not going to make a net gain here? The more we're on the same page of increasing our standards, like I like Onyx Coffee Labs, never settle for good enough. Always kind of increasing your awareness of what specialty can be and increasing your skills in your presentation of it. That's where we want to be. So know your benchmarks, Know the taste profiles of the benchmarks of your taste profiles. Build a way to keep yourselves accountable to quality on the bar. Part of this is cleaning during the shift, back flushing often. You can back flush with water every hour if you want. You can back flush with soap. You can back flush with Cafiza and be really thorough after a rush and start from a fresh group head. There are lots of ways that you can maintain the quality of your coffee throughout the shift, but out of self-preservation and just sheer pushing through the line, we tend to let quality slip. And we talked in our last episode about how a rush is so critical to establishing who you are as a business and what specialty coffee is as a concept, because that's when the most people are in your store, and therefore it has the biggest impact to make. So if your quality is off, if your quality is only at its best when you're at your slowest, then what we're doing is we're trying to run this race with a parachute tied to our backs. So minimize the drag, increase our accountability during the rush, increase our accountability to check in on the flavors and the benchmarks of what we're putting out there, and make sure that we're keeping things clean, orderly, and just presentable. That is going to minimize the negative experience that customers have when they come in. So how we are behind the bar, how the cafe is in terms of how the customer experiences it, what leadership is doing to make sure that things are communicated well, make sure that people are prepared and equipped, and what kind of quality are we putting out, and what kind of checks and balances do we have to make sure that we're putting out specialty level drinks at every moment. These are just some of the things that we can do to increase the sweetness of the experience and decrease the bitterness. It's one of the things that will help us not ruin the specialty experience. Because if we think that we are good enough, the neutral position of a coffee shop slides into apathy very, very quickly, and it devolves from there. It devolves and it turns into these factions of us versus them, and nobody likes to go to a shop like that for very long before they most of the time, go to another one where the coffee is cheaper, and at least they don't feel like they're interrupting somebody. Or at least if they do, they're not paying as much money for it. So let's take these things and really ponder them. Think about how we are, what we do, what we can affect in terms of change in the positions that we occupy in the cafe. How can we create this impact of absence where customers come in and they feel that something is just different about this cafe? Things are just taken care of. I'm taken care of. The coffee is taken care of. The staff are being taken care of. This is a healthy and vibrant ecosystem in which specialty coffee can thrive. And if our cafes are increasingly representing coffee this way, and that's something we're working towards consciously, daily, then collectively, all the thousands and thousands of bars will make a huge impact in terms of how people perceive specialty coffee globally, and that will help create a great demand that will fuel the sustainability of our industry. So yeah, I hope this was a helpful episode and got you thinking a little bit. It's always good to sort of put a mirror to what we're doing behind the bar and sort of shake ourselves free from the day in and day out hypnosis that can kind of take over. If you want the notes for this show, you can go to keystotheshop.com, and when you do, on the sidebar, there's a place for you to put your email. And when you send your email in, you will be on a list to receive the show notes into your inbox every week. That is the highlights from each episode, kind of a bullet point format of the key takeaways and links to resources mentioned in each episode as well. So keystotheshop.com. and enter your email address, and that's all it takes. Now, if you want to reach out to me, if you have questions, comments, or feedback, then please email chris@keystotheshop.com. If you want to reach out to me and talk about what it would look like for Keys to the Shop Consulting to work with you and your staff to deliver a great specialty experience in your town, just email me at that same email address, and you can also call me at 502-715-1465. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the show. and leave a review or a rating. If you love what we're doing, I want to know how the show has impacted you and your shop or your career. Thank you to those of you who have taken the time to do so on iTunes. It really makes a big difference, and I appreciate you all. Stay tuned to Keys to the Shop because we have a lot of great interviews coming up. We have an episode this Friday for Founder Friday. We're talking with the founder of Pinhole Coffee in San Francisco, Jo Ellen Dipakakibo, and I'm really excited for you to listen to that conversation. Just a really inspirational story and a great view towards the cafe and coffee shop life. So stay tuned for that and more in the following weeks. Thank you again for joining me on the show. I appreciate you coming here and listening, and I can't wait to join you again soon. Thanks, and I truly do hope that this episode has given you keys to the shop.